he had discovered something. He thought he'd found something. And so he imposed these same rules and regulations. And again, phenomenal results. The death rate was cut almost to zero. But again, the same thing happened. The doctors in that hospital said, it's a fluke. We're not going to do this anymore. Well, Semmelweis, in 1865, died in a mental hospital. He had lost his family, he had lost his reputation, he had lost his income, he had lost his mind, because he could not understand how, when they saw the results, that they couldn't do what he was saying to do to save lives physically. The same year in which Semmelweis died, there was a man by the name of Joseph Lister, yes, Listerine, that dude, Joseph Lister, in England, who became held as the father of antiseptic medicine. Lister himself recognized that Semmelweis was the one who really was the father, the pioneer of this science of controlling infection. Semmelweis had an obligation. He had an obligation to share what he had discovered in the real world, a medical truth that saved lives, physical lives. Our obligation. When Paul says, I'm obligated to these folks, people that don't like me, who sometimes stone me and spit on me, I'm obligated to them. I'm obligated to them because Paul, and we too should be like Paul, he had discovered a spiritual truth that saved men and women, boys and girls, eternally to life. We're indebted to share the costly price of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when we don't, it brings us to a very ugly piece of scripture that none of us like to read. We like to hear about God's love, you know. I like to hear about God's grace. But there's another aspect to God. God is not only wholly loving, He's not only a wholly gracious God, He is a wholly just God, and He is angry at sin. And so we read in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 and 19, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. Wrath against wickedness, those who have suppressed the truth in their wickedness. You know, we tend to think of godlessness and wickedness as personified in people like Ted Bundy, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Emperor Nero, King Ahab, Queen Jezebel, Cain who killed his brother. And of course we see the wrath of God being revealed against such. But this wrath of God, which is not a popular subject to contemplate, it's not a happy thing to think about. God's judgment against the bad guys is fine and dandy. But think about His wrath here in terms of that little three-letter word. The little three-letter word there in that equation, against all. So that includes me and you. Against all wickedness and ungodliness. Are we suppressing the truth in our wickedness? You need to ask yourself that this morning. Are we guilty of any kind of wickedness? Are we guilty of something that we wouldn't like for the rest of the congregation to know about? You know, they've made me the executive pastor down at Granada. I thought, man, that's a nice title, executive pastor, you know. And then I realized that means I'm the 3M guy down at the church. That's the minister of minutia and manure. You know, I have to keep buying a bigger shovel. You know, the sheep look so good on Sunday morning. I mean, I look at it all, y'all, and you look good. You look so nice and cleaned up. But sheep are dumb and dirty. And during the week, they sort of wander off the reservation. And they do crazy, insane things. Just amazing. Wickedness, sinfulness, we're all guilty. I want to use another illustration here to really drive this home. Again, I'm sorry, I have to apologize. I was a history major, so I love history. And so this illustration comes from history, and it's this. In 1905, a prominent American evangelical pastor visited the islands of Japan. He returned to the United States, and he pleaded with the American churches to send 1,000 missionaries to share the gospel in Japan. And he said, if we don't share the gospel message of peace with the people of Japan, that within 50 years we will be at war with them. We shall have to spend vast sums of money. We will have to send 200,000 of our finest young men with guns and bayonets to fight the fight. It's estimated that if the church had arisen to the call, that for 50 years, 1,000 American missionaries going to Japan would have cost approximately $34 million. Whew, that's a lot of zeros, huh? The American response was this. To those pleas by this pastor that God had opened his eyes and seen this great need, there was a response. The church did not send 1,000 missionaries. Instead, they sent 6. That's right, 6. Not 1,000, they sent 6. Well, at least they did something. I mean, there are churches that do nothing. War came not in 50 years, but only 36 years after this pastor called for this sending of the missionaries. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, over 1 million American troops fought in that war. And they fought not only with guns and bayonets, but it took 2 atomic bombs to stop the war with Japan. It's estimated that the war with Japan, not the whole of World War II, but just the war in the Pacific theater, cost in excess of $90 billion. I don't know about you, but I have a problem. I have a hard time understanding all those zeros. And let me explain those zeros to you. You know the difference between a million and a billion? If somebody came, some of you may be old enough to remember The Millionaire. Remember that show that was on when we were kids about Michael Anthony knocking on the door saying, hey, I've got a check from Mr. So-and-so for $1 million, tax-free. Here's your $1 million. I wouldn't go very far. I wouldn't even pay my gas bill these days, you know. Certainly not my windstorm. But anyway, he would come and what if somebody came to your door this afternoon and said, I got $1 million, I'm going to give you $1 million. The only rule is that you have to spend it at least a rate of $1,000 a day. Well, I just put gas in the car, you know, for a week. You know how long it would take to spend $1 million, spending it at $1,000 a day? It would take just short of 3 years. Just short of 3 years. It'd be gone. $1 million just doesn't go as far as it used to, does it? If somebody came this afternoon and said, Woody, I've got $1 billion for you, but you have to spend it at $1,000 a day. If I was real conservative, only spend it at a rate of $1,000 a day, do you know how long it would take me to spend $1 billion at the rate of $1,000 a day? Over 2,000 years. That's the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. Let me tell you, when the people of God don't do what God's calling them to do, God's wrath will be revealed. Wickedness is the moral insanity of not obeying